Mississippi, an African-American student, and he said to me, I have trouble believing I can do this. And I said, why? He said, when I was in second grade, I was told by my teacher that I was too dumb and I had to go to summer school. And I went to summer school, and every kid in the summer school class was black, and my teacher there told me I was too smart to be in summer school, and I've been trying to figure out which teacher was right my whole life. I had another student who said, I was talking to her, she was a doctoral student, and she said, that's just, under her breath, that's just a fear of the awesome. I said, what's the fear of the awesome? And she said, that a girl like me can be getting a PhD. So what do you mean? She said, I'm a poor black girl, daughter of a preacher, and I'm a lesbian. People like me, they don't get a PhD. So in conversations with these folks, other folks, international folks, they said, it's your job as a majority culture member to figure this thing out. Don't ask me to teach you. So I read lots of books and watched lots of documentaries. I learned that Thurgood Marshall got sent to the basement of his school for poor behavior every day and memorized the Constitution. Through that experience, I went to Hampton and spent 2 days talking to families there. We have a civil rights trip. We take students to the Deep South each year. My kids pick people like Nelson Mandela and Ruby Bridges to write their history reports on. It's deep in my soul. I care deeply. But like Maura said, I watch TV. I have neighbors and friends. I'm racist. I'm sexist. I've absorbed the culture. And so I teach the undergraduate and the graduate class on multicultural families to family therapists at BYU. That's my specialty. And we just started a study abroad this summer in Mexico City to go to indigenous healing places. So it's really cool. I care deeply about it, and we're going to try to help have a conversation about what we do in our families to have conversations about race. I'll just leave with this thought. My daughter said to me the other day, she's 15, I don't even remember what it was. She said, I said this, is it racist? It's a very interesting question, because it identified someone as Latino or Asian or black, and it said, sweetheart, racist comments come from a place of difference is bad. You're actually saying this difference is good and admirable. We'll train up a whole generation of kids to even acknowledge that race exists as a racist statement. To say that someone is from Singapore is racist. And so I think kids today have learned how to be politically correct to a very damaging level. They don't know how to talk about difference, to embrace it, to enjoy it. So that's a little bit of my story.
In mine, I'm Steve. I, like Jonathan, feel like we don't have any special qualifications other than we care. That was well said. I was invited by Diane Jones because of our several years of friendship and that we're candid with each other. As she would tell it, there's no wall, and never was, between us because of race or anything else. And so, pretty straightforward. I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember the Andy Griffith Show, whether or not you watched it. I grew up in Mayberry, not literally, but in a small town in central Utah where there wasn't a single black person. The whole time I'm there, 18 years, all the way graduating high school. Didn't know one personally. Not one. So there was nobody to stereotype, there was nobody to dislike or to anything, because you didn't know them. Blacks to me were Magic Johnson, Dr. J, Michael Jackson. I think he was black.
You know when he was.
When I go on vacation, I'd see them. Pretty sure I saw Morris Hudson at Disneyland one year. But this isn't a way to establish a friendship. So then I serve an LDS mission, 19 years old, and get called to Alabama. There are a couple of black people there. So I'm in Birmingham, and my first area is Ensley, northwestern Birmingham. It's easily as black as Provo is white. And one of the first days we hop on our bikes, a couple of white guys in white shirt and tie, and riding into the neighborhood. And from out of nowhere, I didn't even know where they came from. All of a sudden, we had 7 black guys forming a human roadblock in front of us and asking us, what are y'all doing here? You know, what's your business in this neighborhood? I remember not being scared. Maybe that's naivete. maybe it's a clean conscience that we knew we weren't there to make any trouble or do anything objectionable. But they asked that, and then when we said, oh, we're missionaries for the church, we pointed to our name tag and everything. And immediately there was this, oh, you're here to teach people about Jesus. You can come here anytime you want. And they immediately backed off and welcomed us. So that was some of my first interaction on the mission. And I'm only going to bring up this. I won't read the whole story to you, but I'm going to bring up this only so there's referred to it in our discussion. You'll know what I'm talking about. If you've ever seen this Dr. Seuss story, you've got starbelly sneetches, and they don't let plain bellies hang out with them. They come to their beach frankfurter roasts and so forth. So the plain bellies don't like that, being excluded. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about star bellies like Chief King's star right there, law enforcement versus African American community, or what white and black, or whether the blacks are the ones with the star, it doesn't matter. We're talking about a separation, and along comes Sylvester McMonkey McBean, and he's willing to start putting stars on the bellies of the planes for a fee. And now they've got stars, and these guys that already had them don't like that, because now we can't have the separation. So he offers to take their stars off, and so on. We get in this big cycle to where eventually they're so confused, they don't even know who originally had stars, who didn't. And it all ends with harmony, because they've forgotten. They've forgotten they were Hatfields and McCoys. They're just Sneetches, whether they have a star or not. But I only bring it up because look at Sylvester. Okay, look what he did. And I only want to point that out because there are very powerful people and forces in our society that want to create animosity between anybody, between men and women, white and black, law enforcement, and others, and so on. And they get money, potentially, they get power, they get fame, any or all of those things. Powerful, compelling reasons for them to stir that pot. So when I referred to Sylvester during our discussion, if we do it all, you'll know we're talking about somebody who didn't have the best of intentions in trying to bring parties together. Okay?
Thank you. So maybe we can start with what you see as the roadblocks are to having conversations at all, even if they're bad conversations, about race in our families. Why aren't we talking about race in our family? This is where you participate.
I'll start. I think that sometimes it's uncomfortable,
Okay.
and then it's not safe, because if you start it, then you're going somewhere you're not sure where you're going to go. It's an uncharted water, I guess.
Uncertain. Yeah.
I think because Provo is probably one of the most homogeneous cities in the nation, that we don't talk about it because we don't have to deal with it. I mean, if you're in a first grade class or a fifth grade class, and there's nobody in the class that's different than you, why would your parents bring it up? Why would you even talk about it in your home? If it doesn't affect us, why deal with it?
So it puts a dilemma on a few smaller groups of people to have to know about the majority, but the majority doesn't have to do anything to know about the minority. Okay, I think that's very true. What else? Yes.
In our family, we were taught not to talk. I mean, we were that biracial family. You just take it on the chin. You just don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Well, I think that those of us who do talk about it, because it's our very real reality, it makes our neighbors, our brothers and sisters, very uncomfortable. And so if you're a child and you're watching this interaction and you see that there's somebody who wants to talk about it, but the other people get uncomfortable at the thought of having to have that hard conversation, then you learn that that's a taboo thing to talk about.
And kids are good at reading the energy of the adults. The adults are freaking out, so I'm going to shut it down.
Yeah.
I think that's very true. Others?
I think we have a culture of politeness, particularly here in Utah County, and like you said, people are coding, don't talk about race. Oh, that means you're polite or politically correct, and then just erring on that side, and being in a position of privilege, like, oh well, it's not an issue of my life, so
That's right.
it's okay to not talk about it.
I forgot about an article that I read. There's a professor at Weber State who went to two other universities, taught at two other universities before he came here, and he is a surveyor of communication styles and patterns. He was in Indiana, Missouri, something like that. But when he came to Utah, he found that Utah had the highest deference for authority on the communication scale and the highest scores for conflict avoidance. So if you defer to authority and you avoid conflict, it makes it very difficult to have any kind of conversation. Stylistically, there's something about being a good Mormon is being polite and not causing problems.
I think what's also important to discuss as parents or as people who live in Utah is the fact that kids do pick up on body language, and if the only time that you see people of color is on TV, what's the body language of your parents' reactions to seeing people of color on TV? Whether it's a conversation about buses that lined up to stop immigration, or if it's the president on the TV and there's a response that your parents are having. I was at a large military-related buffet, end-of-year buffet, and as part of it, there's you charge the punch. There's a toast that you give. One of the pieces of the speech is to the commander-in-chief. The entire room was silent. The entire room was silent at a university-level ROTC function. That kind of thing sends a message, and it's supported by nonverbal body language. I have 3 kids, and I volunteer in their school because I know in their first grade classroom they don't see anybody like me. So I go in there to try and make that introduction early and talk to my kids, my children. We read about Harriet Tubman and we read about Booker T. Washington, and I want them to know that there are stories about their heritage. All 3 of my kids pass for white. All 3 of them do. They're learning about what it means to be black, and they're so confused. So we just keep it very, very simple. You have melanin in your skin. That's what makes you brown. It's a chemical. My son is big into science. I have chemicals in my skin. Yeah, you do. You have chemicals in your skin. So you really have to do it in a developmental way for your children, for me at least. And so when I had my kids, I thought I was going to have these children that identified as black, so it wouldn't be a big deal for me. I have 3 white kids. And so I sit here and I'm like, how do I raise white allies? Because at some point in time, they're going to have to disclose that they're African American. And so for me as a parent, I have to be forward thinking, and I don't know what it's like for my friends that don't have black children the way that I do. How do you do that? Do you do that? Do you wait for something to happen before you do it? And then what's the consequence of waiting, I guess is my question. I don't feel like I can wait.
Not a luxury. Yeah. So we've identified a few really valuable things here that get in the way. Let's talk about some successes. What have you seen that's gone well in schools, in church communities, in families where conversations, even for young children around race, are happening in positive, productive ways? So we just heard one example. What do we assign them to read? When they have a list of people to do a book report on, who are we choosing for them to do a book report on? When you're giving public talks at church elsewhere, do you use examples of people of color as the heroines and heroes in the story? That's a simple thing. So what have you seen? What have you seen? There's some successes. Yes.
I think I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah, but I think what I've seen a lot is mostly doing the Dr. King holiday. Then you'll see book reports or essays that the students have to write, and a lot of them relate to Mrs. Rosa Parks.
Yeah.
And I think some of the other people they don't really relate to because it seems like more people talk about Mrs. Parks. They talk about Dr. King. They talk about President Nelson Mandela, but they don't talk about. They don't know the history behind, for instance, Emmett Till.
Right.
Some of the people like that, Harriet Tubman, Booker T. Washington. So, but I think with the schools now, it seems like they're trying to get a little bit more education to the students to have them start doing a little bit research because with the internet now, all they have to do is Google it and they can find out all kinds of information.
The Southern Poverty Law Center grades each state on high school curriculum for civil rights movement and race relations, and 17 states got a 0 score, 0 out of 100, F. Utah's one of them. There are very few states that even scored a C in terms of content. So one thing we can do is ask for more content in classes, and we can offer to guest speak or provide materials. If you say to a teacher, I have materials and I'll do part of a lecture one day, a lot of people are really grateful to have that. In New York, our teacher in the first grade handed out a token to everyone who's blue or red. At the beginning of the day, all the red token kids, first in line, 20 minutes extra recess. All day long, all these inequalities, got to go to lunch, extra serving lunch all day. But at the end of the day, the kids were pissed. I mean, really upset. No one knew why. Everyone got randomly assigned. And then they started their unit on MLK's childhood. And so they came with this sense of injustice to the unit. And I remember our daughter in first grade coming home and just saying, that isn't right. Sally or whoever, that isn't right. They went out to lunch 20 minutes before I did. That isn't right. Exactly. So they're creating an emotional experience as well. So that was a very powerful teaching. We go 1, 2, 3 hands. Yes.
So I think along the lines of if we want to see like more content about offering that up ourselves. So when the film was released about Joan Mulholland, I bought up like 6 copies, and there were several teachers in the audience. And I said, take this to your class, take this to your class. And I'm a broke graduate student, but I was like, this is important. I sent it to my high school history teacher, that was my old basketball coach, sent it to Arizona, because I know they're not talking about that stuff in Arizona. And I said, like, if I want
I have to tell people who Joan Mulholland is.
Oh, Joan Mulholland was a freedom writer, civil rights activist. So if you remember the famous lunch counter scene, that picture, the white lady, that's her.
Getting the milkshake dumped on her head.
That's her.
Joan.
So there's a new documentary that her son made that's out about her. But it's just, okay, here's a piece of curriculum that's important that should be in schools. It's our responsibility to bring it to the schools. And so I think, I hope that those teachers, they sounded enthusiastic to show the films. I hope they've been shown and had a discussion. But I think that's something we can do.
Good. Excellent.
This is a little bit different, but I'm a chaplain over at Utah Valley University, and we have 40 faith groups on campus, many of which are trying to kill each other. So that's one of my major jobs, is to keep them from killing each other. And what we've done is, as a society, I think, is kind of assigned an idea about a group. So like all Muslims are terrorists, all Mormons are polygamists, all, go down the list. And what we have found that helps more than anything is to do community service together, because they've never been in the same room with other people before. And they get together and they may not even identify what they are or not, but they serve other people, they get to know people, and then, oh, by the way, I'm Muslim. And they go, you're kidding, how come you haven't killed me yet?
Right.
And I think we need to look at some answers, things that we can do to get people more familiar. I think that would make a huge difference, not only from helping with community service, but getting to know people and realizing that we can't just say, this religion is one thing, that everybody in that religion is one thing, or that a color, nationality, whatever it might be. When they decided to build the mosque in Orem, I started getting calls all the time, and so I called Orem City, and I said, are you getting complaints? I understand, people are freaking out about the mosque. The person on the other end started laughing, and they says, yeah, they're concerned about parking in that neighborhood. People immediately jump and assume that it's because it's Muslim mosque,
Yeah, right.
and that wasn't it at all. That was not even on the Richter scale at all. So anyway, just an idea.
It's what Hudson said, right? It's what Hudson said. When the police officers and the brothers got together the first time, they found out. It took me a while to realize after I moved here that there's very little racism based on taught hatred. Most of it's based on ignorance. Total ignorance, total lack of exposure, never having an interaction, right? And then once there's some interaction, then there's some respect. So I just think that's...
Well, we were having National Day of Prayer, and I got a call from someone on a national level asking why I allow Mormons on the platform. And I started laughing. I said, well, I'm in Rome. I got to let them, this is like Mormonia. Give me a break. And they didn't laugh. And I said, you have got to be kidding. I've got Muslims, I've got Hare Krishnas, a bunch of others on the platform. Have you got a problem with them too? No, just the Mormons. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm not getting this. Well, they're not Christian enough. And I said, buddy, neither are you. And I then said some other things, but anyway. I don't get that, I don't understand.
Linda, I'm shocked. Did you say?
Yeah, I know, well, I have to watch it because I'm a chaplain, you know. I say heck and darn. Anyway.
This is real, girl.
So if you don't know Linda, someone you really need to know, we've done the United We Sing Interfaith Sing. This is our third time
Yeah.
this fall, and it's 3 different religions getting together to celebrate the music. It's been wonderful. So
Really has.
she's a real leader in interfaith interaction.
But a lot of it is racial and nationality
You bet it
as
is.
well as religion, because especially with students coming into BYU, UVU, foreign students, you know, they're mixing the pot, and that is the best way we're gonna get it done, because I think that's a very healthy atmosphere for that to develop.
Yes.
I just, Stephen, you said something that, and I don't know if everybody else thought what I thought, but when you were talking about going into the Birmingham, Alabama, riding your bikes, you know, I think that just the mindset sometimes here in Utah, I don't think that people are racist, but I think that they have biases, and those biases can mean a difference between life or death. So you were in the inner city, the hood, riding your bike, and you say you were surrounded, and then, you know, when you got an opportunity to say, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing, and people backed away. And I think about Darian Hunt, who was walking down the street with a sword, and someone called the police on him. And because of that situation, he is dead. And so I just think that we don't get those opportunities, but trying to bring those up to people and say, yeah, we don't get the opportunity for people for a individual, for our you know, our community to come to us before they call the police on us. Like, we're automatically assumed to be up to no good. And so those are the things that I think that on a regular basis, you know, I have to be concerned about, for not only for myself, but also for my children.
So that, I mean, there's a reason we're here as citizens, educators, police officers. Let's bring that piece in. So it was really nice to talk to the chief the other day. I don't know if you're going to tell the story here, but I think it was represented. I think Hudson told both sides of this story, which is what it feels like to be profiled for those young guys who are just trying to get home. Because as someone on our civil rights trip told us, I was less worried about Bull Connor than I was about what my mom would do when she found out I was marching. So I think you told that side. But the other side that I hadn't heard, Chief, you told us about what it's like to feel targeted as a police officer. Can we dialogue just a little bit about the community, how we interact with the police, how can we build bridges there? Do you mind telling that story?
Yeah, no. And the officers here know there's a resident community, if you've seen on Facebook, of Mr. Choi, who has made it really public that he's going to kill a police officer if they come into his house, and made some really very direct threats, and then personalized it by sending it to me and the sheriff just to make sure we got the posting and things. And so and the community is a very safe community. We all get along, but sometimes people don't understand the threat levels that the officers are under when they get realistic threats like this. And so we had to take, you know, additional safety precautions for the officers. And so that's why when you have this tension that Morris talked about, I called you Morris. I never call you Morris.
I don't know what got into you.
I don't know either. I'm reading it right there. Anyway, you know, that's why there's almost natural tension when you have these confrontations. The story he told about us turning the corner and seeing this guy in the middle of the street is typical of the police experience. When we first saw him, we didn't even know he was black.
Right.
And then Hudson said, number 5, which meant that was the 5th black person he's seen in Provo as we got closer. And as we left, we said, you know what, this is a great talking point. We've seen many, but we're going to have to repeat that because we know as soon as he left, he told a different story. That I was just stopped for doing that. So the officers, and I'm really proud of the men and women of the department here, but especially white police officers, they feel like in this conversation that they're the bad guys. And they're not. And so we have to make it a safe conversation. And I got to tell you, you know, hear from the NAACP, who's the chairman of the tri-state area, and she's taken a leadership role by bringing police leaders to talk about that. So these conversations are going on, but we gotta continue to do that. But that maybe explains why some of the tension is with the police.
So we're all here, let's talk a little bit about that. So you're in your neighborhood, you're just trying to talk to somebody and they end up calling the police on you. And your thought process, Tamu, is that first you described eloquently, I'm just trying to interact with someone here. And they assume I'm up to something dangerous or my kids are up to something dangerous. Then where does it go from there for you?
It's actually, it's more likely to happen in the neighborhood next to mine, because in my neighborhood I'm known, right?
Right.
And so I don't have, that there's a fear of certain individuals in the neighborhood, but there's the bigger fear comes for my kids leaving the neighborhood. And so, because they're not Tamu's kid, they're just some random black kid. And that kid is up to no good, because what is he doing here? He couldn't possibly have any business in this neighborhood. And so for me, it really has, since I've been in Utah, it really has been about trying to maintain a relationship with the greater black community, but also having to be out there and always having to be the person that speaks to the elephant in the room, that makes people feel uncomfortable. And you know, I guess being the person that says, okay, well, that person is going to be an ally, but that's the only one. But always having to be the person. And so that becomes laborsome. Within the black community, we call it racial battle fatigue syndrome. I mean, you know, but not knowing who's going to stand with you and who behind closed doors are just going to say, well, why don't they just move? You know, why are they here? I mean, they should just leave if we're that bad, because people don't want to acknowledge that. But there's that fear of one of these days, like when do I teach my children that they may have to run for their life from a police officer? When do I teach my children? You know, I don't feel like I have the luxury that some of my white counterparts have. I mean, for example, my son was in the 5th grade. Teacher told him a joke about nigger knocking in the 5th grade. And so when we called her out on it, when he called her out, he said, you mean doorbell ditch? No, I mean nigger knocking. No, you mean doorbell ditch? No, I mean nigger knocking. This is at school. So he said, I'm gonna go call my mom. And so I go to the school, and it's kind of a routine thing. The principal's, you know, I try to get on top of it. I've never heard that term before. And I mean, I can't be mad at the principal, but then he looks at my 10-year-old son and says, well, can you just teach us? Like, he's a student. So black kids here, Latin kids here, Polynesian kids here, they have to listen to learn, and they also have to listen to educate. And I know my neighbor's kids don't have to deal with that. So then when I bring it up, then it's a complaint. It's, you know, it's not our problem. It's, you know, well, she should have never did that. But she's a really good person. They're always really good people. They're really good people. My kids, she was my kid's teacher. She's great, but you're not saying how great my kid is. You're not saying, you know, so you're telling me that this person, I'm not mad at her. I mean, I was upset with the situation. I don't hate the lady. I think that, you know, she just revealed something to me that I didn't know about her. But she still is in the district. You know, she still taught at the school. She felt it was better for him not to be in her class, so he was moved. It was not his choice. And so I just thought, we just want to bury it. And so for me as a parent, there are things that I think my neighbors think that they know, or they think that they're cautious, or they think that nothing will ever happen to my kids, but I know different.
Can I jump in and add something to that, Tamu? Is that I think living in Utah around a particularly homogenous situation here in Provo, where you have the religious minority status of white people in Utah, it's a convenient minority status. They'll say, well, I went and I had to talk about how I was Mormon, and so I know what it's like to be different. Well, nobody knows you're Mormon when they look at you. You don't have a horn like everybody says you're supposed to have. You don't have all those things that make you Mormon, right? But they attempt to try and make that connection, like, okay, I know what it's like. But there's this joy that comes with talking about how Mormon you are, because you're supposed to be out there converting folks to Jesus by being Mormon. Very different from having to say, this is what it's like for me to be a black kid. You know, a 10-year-old Mormon can get out there and be like, I, did this thing to go and spread the gospel, and a 10-year-old black kid, we don't have the same kind of message to share. And I don't
And
know.
nobody is jumping on to be black.
No one
except
is,
for
Rachel
Dolezal.
Dolezal, but yeah, between besides her, no one's trying to be black. So I mean, it's a really interesting conversation. And one of the things that tends to happen with racial-related conversations is people of color will kind of say, this is my experience. And I'm really, really interested in the folks that have more access to the power structure than I do, to hear what this is like for you. I'm interested in deconstructing. I'm an educator, I'm a therapist, I'm all about the mind and how the mind processes through these things. I'd love to know, how do we deconstruct so that we can reconnect? Because I think if we talk about all these really, really good things, what's the process you went through of deconstructing so that you were able to better connect across different sets? That's a big question for me.
Well, let's hear from, we have lots of police officers here, we have people at city council. Let's hear some of their thoughts.
When you talk about exposure deconstruction, what are you asking?
Do you ever have to sit and think for a second, like to have a second thought, you know what, I'm white. Am I bringing some whiteness into this situation that maybe doesn't need to be
The
there?
implicit bias, something that might
Bringing the implicit, explicit, absolutely. Being able to say, I'm white, I'm male, I'm female, I'm Mormon, whatever that piece might be that gives you a little bit of leverage over or with someone, do you ever recognize that and allow it to help you shift a conversation or a situation in a different direction than what it's assumed to go?
I was assigned early on in the early 90s into Provo High School as one of our first school officers. And I think at many times during that course of in that first opportunity, I had to re-educate, reassess where I was at personally. What implicit biases maybe I had brought. I had grown up here in Utah. My best friend in elementary school was a little Asian boy named Ricky Lou Young Ping. I didn't even realize there was a difference in who we were. Right. And so when I got into the schools, I actually had to take a step back because I actually felt some biases coming back the other way. Especially when I dealt with some of the kids in the Latino community, or were their biases coming back because I was a white police officer. Mm-hmm. Something as simple as taking the time to educate myself in their culture, taking time to engage in dialogue, quickly helped build a solid reputation, and my experiences in the schools over the course of time were incredible. I've built incredible friendships from that. So you look at where I started as a young boy, where I'm at now as a man, and most of it had to come to our exposures, education, the dialogue, simply taking the time to recognize that maybe I did have some. I am the police. Mm-hmm. I'm a white police officer. Well, could that have an effect in a situation, the call that I'm on? Yeah, absolutely. That has to be part of that mitigating dialogue. But then again, it doesn't change what my role or responsibility may be as a police officer. I've sworn to protect the innocent and the weak and those that can't protect themselves. That's everybody. Mm-hmm. And yet to come into it and just like the chief had said, or others have said, we're actually targeted specifically, because of who we are and what we do. I got into this job because I wanted to make a difference. And if part of making that difference is educating myself and immersing myself in other cultures and getting better, then that's a responsibility we all share.
Thank you.
And just to piggyback with what LaShawn said, I guess for me, I also would like to know what makes having the conversation so difficult for, the conversation of race so difficult for our white counterparts to have.
My comment is, I'm just a good old Mormon Utah girl who grew up here. But the first time when I met Diane McAdam Jones, she could only talk about being black. And I said to her, why do you always, I don't care what color you are. Why do you talk so much about being black? And it was a great conversation for us. See, our kids, we grew up in what you'd probably call, our kids grew up in kind of the ghetto of Pleasant Grove, where a lot of townhomes, a lot of people stuck in together, next door neighbors. He was black, she was white, 3 fathers, lots of kids in this townhome, but my kids played with them. The time that we realized maybe a little more that they were black and we were white is when my daughter got lice from the local movie theater and gave it to her friend. And her getting it out of her hair was a lot harder than my daughter's. And that's where, maybe we learned there was a difference. We didn't have a conversation at home because we interacted with the Latinos in the neighborhood. the kids next door, there wasn't a difference. And then so it was a really cultural experience for me as a girl from Utah to say, why do you always, I don't care what color you are. I just think you're fascinating and fun, and let's go to Witches Night Out, you know? So that's where I don't get why we can't talk as people. Why do we have to talk as you're black and I'm white? Why can't we just talk? Why? I don't get that in my situation and where I am, and I think a lot of people in Utah would feel that same way. Your neighbors, if your black child came down to my road, I'd just say, hey, where are you from? Or where's your family, you know?
So there's a really tough assumption that I wrestle for students to get, and it's hard. It's really hard, which is, from where I am, I can accept you in ways that you don't have the ability to accept or influence me. So that privilege piece of, I can go in and out of any door, so it doesn't hurt me to invite you into my door, is different than someone who can't go in most doors and feels hurt when you say, why don't you just come in this door? And the best visual representation I've seen of that is in the movie Remember the Titans, where the one blonde kid from California tries to take him to the restaurant, and he's sure that they'll be served, and then they're not served, his teammates, and then they're so pissed at him because he assumed that their experience was similar to his just because he willed it. So I think for me, what's been hardest for me to have racial conversations is that I have to acknowledge an inherent unequalness and unfairness when I want it to be all fair, because when I recognize it's not fair and equal, then I feel guilty, and I feel responsible, and I feel it's my fault. So there's some real nice white racial identity models, and it always starts with denial, then anger, then guilt and shame, and that's where so many people have stopped. And there's no good in that. Then you have to go through to a place of acceptance and empowerment. And so I think for me, the reason the white folks, we don't like to talk about it is because it's so shame and guilt producing. And then we have all this religious stuff in our head about that makes us bad people. If we're not doing something right or unchristian, then we're bad human beings. And so we don't own this alone, Jews, Catholics, we're all great at shaming. But Mormons are really good at shaming. So I think that's what happens, in my opinion. And then what happens is when we do talk about it, we get pounded. So I can remember when I first went home and I was alive with racial zeal, and I beat the crap out of every one of my family members. And I have one sister-in-law who's still really afraid to talk to me. This is like 10 years ago. And no matter how right I was on the topic, I've damaged that relationship. So this righteous, you have to learn, I'm informed, you suck is where I came from, and she's never trusted or forgiven me since then. And so being able to openly explore without being one down on race is a skill very few people have. It's been my experience, white or black. We can tell everyone how much they suck about it. I mean, we're great at that. That's what political correctness has taught us to do. But the ability to sit with someone and say, when you believe that or feel that, it really influences me negatively, and sit and hold each other. That's just a skill that very few people have, white or black. And so I think that's why it doesn't happen very much. Because it becomes very shaming and moralistic on every side. And it sounds like this. Well, I don't see color, you shouldn't either. Shame. If you really knew what it was like to be black, you'd see how hard my life is. Shame. I mean, we just shame. We just shame. We don't dialogue because we don't know how.
Dr. Sandberg,
Yeah.
if I could, and Jill, thank you so much for saying that, because that's, as we come to understand, I grew up in New York. I was a beat cop in a 100% African American part of Baltimore. That the only other white people I saw were other cops or tourists that got lost in Winter Harbor once in a while. And so I think I understand a little bit of the black experience. But my whole life I've been a white guy. Tamu hears me say this all the time. You know, I've been a white guy. I don't know what it's been to grow up, especially as a young African American male, just in the descriptions. When we have these honest conversations with young cops, they say exactly what you say. They say, listen, can't we get over this? I didn't do anything. I'm a good person. And we have to say, yes, you are. And then, but here's my experience. And once you have that shared experience, there's a little more understanding. And one of the quotes that especially whites say, and it's true, they believe it, is that I don't see color, I just see people. And my instructions to my cops here, if you don't see color first, I'm firing you because we're supposed to be trained observers. Okay, so you're out the door. Okay, so if you don't see that, but you have, just like the captain mentioned, you have to understand how that conversation is going to be impacted by your position. And so understand that the way Tamu sees the police, and if I could share how we met, right? She's mad at the police. And you know when Tamagot's mad at the police, if you don't know Tamu, you know this is a nice Tamu.
She doesn't mad well.
She doesn't mad well, you know, she doesn't mad well. And then, actually I may have met Keith first, so I meet Keith, her husband, first, and they were angry about something that goes on. And we were able to quickly bond in how long? Because of the gift of time and just having a conversation and acknowledging that there's different perspectives. And then we decided, hey, you know what, let's not just get along, let's make a positive difference and stuff too. So it gets back to the gift of time and just having dialogue and stuff back and forth.
Well, I
But
can
thank
to
you for
give
saying
my
that.
last comment.
I interrupted, my fault, sorry.
That's okay. My last comment was when I sat down with Diane and she was able to tell me what she has been through. That changed me in my perspective of what she's been through, and is she black or is she white, like she's talked about. Gave me a whole another Utah girl perspective, and like you said, conversations is what changes. Anyway. The end.
And Jill, I just want to say thank you. I think that it's difficult for people to be raw and to be real, especially in front of people they don't know. And so I just want to say thank you for that. Thank you. I know that it's hard.
Let's go here and then here.
I was just gonna say in answering your comment about do you notice that you're white and try to keep that in perspective. I can only speak from my generation, but I feel like we have grown up with this political correctness, and that sometimes when the conversation's brought up, there is that shaming of, well, how can I talk about this? You know, how do I have the right to try to pretend like I know what should change? That's coming from a white perspective. Mm-hmm. And I think that came over time. I remember the very first time when I was little, and my mom has mentioned that I was so lucky to grow up in such a diverse neighborhood in Utah. So I feel like sometimes when I talk to my friends, I just forget that they didn't have that, and I see it as a luxury. But I remember first learning about black slavery in school and talking to my next door neighbor about it, and just being able to have that real childlike innocent conversation. And as I've gotten older, that hasn't been able to come back. Sometimes it's harder to really talk about those things because there's this barrier there of, is this correct? Am I offensive? How do I go about this? Just because most of the time I'll have conversations with people of other cultures and ethnicities and it goes fine, but then you'll have that one person that says, oh, it's because I'm black, or oh, it's because I'm brown, or yeah, you white girl, you don't know, just say something to you and you just go, oh, okay, and then you kind of stop trying.
Yeah.
It's hard to try.
Yeah.
And you want to go, oh, we're all equal, and we want to go, oh, I don't see you any differently, but then there's this other side saying, but I want you to see me differently. Mm-hmm. But how do you take that ambiguity and go with it? It's just kind of hard.
Yeah, but it's all about that ambiguity. I mean, that's where we sit with each other. That's where we sit. That's where we shame, and that's where, oh, I'm a white girl. Okay, so you have an issue with me being white. Is that really what this is about? And then that's when that moment in the conversation, everything drops.
It drops.
And if you can get to that drop place and be like, is this really about me being white? There's our opportunity. Do you know what I mean?
Totally.
And that's the courage and vulnerability
Totally.
that we're trying to have in these conversations. So just this stuff right here and knowing how hard it is and being like, okay, well, do we just, oh, that was a very nice comment and then move on?
Mm-hmm.
Or do we say, okay, what's this like for you? Like, what's coming up? Brene Brown calls it racial privilege shame, particularly for white folk. Like, it's a hard thing. And black folk and people of color, we know how to caretake and help and make you not feel bad. But we try to do this place of vulnerability and authenticity that says, thanks for sharing. I appreciate you putting yourself out there like that. And it's how do we do that? I don't know how to do it with a cop, but I would try with you. You know what I mean? I try with Chief King, but I don't know how to do that across the board. And I think that it's, how do you teach that kind of vulnerability / courage that I think we really want in our communities, so that our kids learn that it's more than playing basketball with cops. It's that cops are deconstructing the fact that I represent a system that communicates a message, that encodes and decodes that message, to the folks that I'm interacting with, how do I make sure I can mitigate that message? Consistency, showing up,
I
you
like
know?
to think of exceptions becoming the rule.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a conversation with the chief, and then it's two conversations, right? And I remember I had an experience about being LDS at the University of the Midwest, and somebody came back and said, I'm sorry we didn't admit we made a mistake based on religion. And I said to one of my Jewish friends, oh good, they're changing their views about Mormons. And she said, no, they're not. They just granted you exception status. But what happens is if you grant enough exception status, then it becomes the rule. So if we have enough conversations where things are different, then it eventually becomes the rule. And I think with public mistakes resulting in very public firings, so whether I say something or not, I'm racist. So I say it out loud, and it's actually true representation. Now I'm fired, but I was just as dangerous to all my neighbors and all my employees yesterday as I was tomorrow. So it really made it unsafe to have public conversations and make public mistakes. And I do think some people should be fired. They have too much power to believe certain things. But then it just silences everybody. So private exception conversations is where I think healing occurs. Because then I see you differently.
I was just gonna say, I think it also starts with our families. That's the fundamental unit of society. If we did nothing else today but go home and work, and yes, several of you have the experience already, many of us not as much. When you go home, don't let race be a taboo topic. That's dumb. It's just dumb. I'll compare it to sex, if
That's
you will.
exactly the same.
Sex is stupid to have it be taboo, and have your children think if they ask anything and you act all awkward, and if you give that nonverbal message, they don't want to come back to you for more information next time. They're going to go seek it elsewhere, but they need to know. My wife and I were always very straightforward with our kids, maybe even told them at times more than they were wanting to hear, right, Emily? But that they knew it was a comfortable conversation and that they're welcome at any time. And we said so explicitly and implicitly to ask us about this. That's how it should be on race. So Tamu, don't give in to the fatigue, because every social setting you bring up that elephant in the room that shouldn't be there. So stupid. I want to laugh at it. I want to laugh at that elephant, that 800-pound gorilla,
Yeah, but
whatever.
you're not my home teacher, so.
Every time you bring it up, if there's only one person possibly influenced and thinking, oh, is this a safe thing to talk about with Tamu and with others, then they might start to change. Well, and they might start to have an influence on their.
And you know what, those two, the other thing though, come carry us, please.
Well, I was
If
just
we're
going to say,
fatigued,
if
you know
I'm
what
in
I
a room
mean?
with Tamu, I'm going to bring it up before she does every
Right,
time.
right.
Just because she has to do it always, I do
Yeah.
it sometimes.
Carry
Right,
it with
us
us.
white folks can bring it up, right? And then everyone doesn't look at Tamu to give the answer. We're 3 minutes, so we got to rotate. Thank you very much. Sorry, sorry. So we
We're
have to-
just filling each other. We're just in the room.
Just getting
And this,
later.
I can point out why we have to at some
Conversation.
point, but this is where these conversations have to continue. So thank you very much for leading the discussion,
Yeah.
guys.
We
Appreciate it.
rotate, just say yes.